Hello, Hornets fans, and welcome back to another Buzz Beat. This is Richie, and I'm joined by Lee and Spencer today. Spencer's having some difficulties with his video, but he is here with us live on Twitch, Twitter video, and YouTube. If you would like to interact with us, submit some comments, questions in the chat, and we can display them on the episode. So the Hornets are winners of 4 straight, which is crazy to say. And we're here to talk about it. On today's episode, we're going to get into a little bit of the Heat game and some recent trends with the Charlotte Hornets in these last handful of games. We'll answer some listener questions, get to some big picture topics. And I figure we spend a little bit of time on the latest update, if you want to call it that, on Miles Bridges. Before we jump in, guys, I know that the All-Star break gave us like 8-9 days off. I feel like that's a great time to get into either TV shows that you couldn't catch up with or new TV shows. Lee, is there a TV show that you want to recommend to everyone?
Well, I would just say, the All-Star break also coincided with me being sick for the first time in like a year. Like, I hardly ever get sick, but when I do, it hits really hard. So I don't know. It's like my body knew it was like okay to be sick for 7 days. So I say all that to say, for the first time, I started watching Better Call Saul, which is like the Breaking Bad precursor. I mean, it's kind of slow, but I think it's really well done. Saul is one of the like most hilarious TV characters, I think, basically of all time. So kind of catching up on that like years later has been interesting. And then, because I'm the most basic person of all time, I'm also, of course, watching The Last of Us as well, which is awesome.
What about you, Spencer? Any new TV shows you're watching?
Bueller?
Can't hear him. No. Spencer? All right. Well, I will just echo that I am also watching The Last of Us, Lee, and I'm only, I want to say 3 episodes in. So I know that I'm a little bit behind. And then my wife is really big into the Outer Banks. So am I. So I had to stop. And now we have to watch this show together. So I'm stopping The Last of Us for now and trying to binge on Outer Banks so I can get that out of the way and move on. I think Outer Banks is definitely like an unrealistic show in the sense that like there's like a near death experience in every single episode. So I don't know if you've seen that at all. Lee, have you seen Outer Banks?
So no, with the caveat that Alyssa, my fiance's younger sister, watches it. So I've like caught like maybe half an episode here or there when they watch it together at times. But yeah, it looks like kind of hilariously unrealistic, like so bad it's good almost kind of thing.
Yes.
Right.
Which
Frankly, I have respect for those. Like I don't judge those type of shows. Like there is a place for like TV that's so bad that it's somewhat enjoyable. Like I actually respect that.
I think Spencer is back with us. Spencer, can you hear us?
Check. Can you hear me?
There he is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, if that UVA game wasn't enough last night for me, now I'm having computer issues just trying to record a podcast about the positive Hornets right now. So, okay, hopefully this works. You were asking me TV shows, Full Swing, the golf Netflix mini series. It's good. It's 8 episodes. They shot it at an interesting time, obviously, with the Live Golf Tour controversy, if that's ringing a bell to anyone. But yeah, I've enjoyed that. Outside that, rewatching Succession. Gearing up for the upcoming season. That's probably one of my like favorite shows ever. So yeah, that's and watching a lot of basketball, a lot of college basketball. So all is well. Great to be with you guys.
Good. Well, we hope that you can stay along with us and there's no more technical issues as we go throughout the recording of this episode. So the Hornets picked up their 19th win of the season, have not lost since February 11th. we just wanted to hit upon some trends recently that we've been noticing with this team before getting into some other topics. And you can almost start anywhere on a team basis, on an individual basis. LaMelo's been awesome. Mark Williams has been fun to watch. But I can't help but start with Gordon Hayward. In the past few games, he's basically finishing and converting from everywhere on the court. The offense is literally being run through either him or LaMelo in these timely situations. When the Hornets need a bucket, they either rely on either of those two players. I don't have the usage numbers in front of me, but those two players are probably really, really high over the past handful of games. And I think one thing, too, with the Hornets team, there's not a lot of physicality, over the past couple of years. And he's the one guy that does bring that. You see that with his screening ability. You see that with him biting opponents on drives, and he doesn't lose any ground. He finishes through contact. I feel like this is his best season finishing at the rim. Definitely in Charlotte. I wouldn't know about his career, but definitely in Charlotte, doing his best job of finishing around the rim. And defensively, too, like he's definitely keeping players off their path, even though he picked up, I want to say 5 fouls against the Heat. But, just stuff like that, his deceleration around the rim is pretty cool to watch. And I think what happens every time we get into this mode, Lee, with Gordon Hayward, we get overly excited about his future with these young pieces around him. And we try to fool ourselves into thinking that he's going to put another full season together next year. And we just, you're always the optimist here. What are you thinking when you see Gordon Hayward play the way that he has been these past handful of games?
You're right, Richie. I generally do, manifest some optimistic takes, but I don't think I just can't really like trick myself into. I mean, this is what we've always known. Like, I feel like we've been pretty straightforward, pretty rational on Hayward on this podcast. Like, he is still a very effective NBA player when he plays, and he's been on one of those like month and a half like streaks where he's been healthy. I mean, he came back in basically like late January, and he's pretty, I mean, maybe he's missed a game here or there, but he's pretty much been healthy since, January 21st. And he's played well. Like, I was at the Denver game, and he was just, fantastic. Like, if you were like in a coma since 2017 and you woke up and went to that Denver game in Charlotte and watched Gordon Hayward, you'd be like, oh, he's been probably an all-star 3 out of the past 7 years or something. So it's just more of the same to me. When he gets these kind of small streaks of health, you're reminded that he's still a pretty unique two-way player in the NBA. And then, there will be another 8-game stretch later in this season where he'll be unavailable because he'll get nicked up. And like, I wish that wasn't the case. I of course, like, deep down inside of me, I hold out hope that one season he'll somehow be able to play 65, 70 games, but I just don't think that's a reality. So that's where I'm at with Hayward.
Yeah. Well, he's been excellent, to y'all's points. And, I think the brightest spot of this is, the brightest part of this rather is just, his trade value is going to increase, with other teams seeing this. I think he could still be a trade candidate this summer. But certainly as the years in the contract drop, teams are going to be more willing to just accept he's going to be available 50 to 60% of the time, especially a contender on the last year of that. But yeah, I mean, like, when he's out there, he looks healthy, physical. He has a burst. He gets to all his spots. I mean, that shot he hit over Bam last night is like the most classic Gordon Hayward shot, ever. And it comes in like a huge moment for the Hornets in that game. They don't win that game without Gordon Hayward. So I think that we fairly criticize his availability, and we probably forget how productive of a player he still is when he is available. Like he is on a bad contract, I understand, but Gordon Hayward is still a winning basketball player. So that provides opportunities for Charlotte next season. You know, if he's able to be available more often, they draft a really nice piece to fill in, you know, with LaMelo and Mark Williams. We'll see about this other player that we're going to talk about later who might be a part of that mix or might not be. So, like, you know, yeah, I mean, Gordon can help this team now next season, and I still think be a tradable asset
Yeah.
for Charlotte as we move forward. But look, it's every time you think he's just like kind of done, he's turned, you know, he's gotten over the hill. He's not available, and he's not the same player anymore. Well, you know, this recent stretch has proven he still is that player. It's just, can he get on the floor enough?
Right. And you mentioned Mark Williams, Spencer, just then, and he's also having an amazing stretch here. And, you know, it's the debate with Duren and Williams. I don't want to have that, but just seeing him on both ends of the court, rebounding the ball, setting hard screens, rolling hard, going after loose balls. What did he have? 12 rebounds in the first half last night against the Heat. Like, I don't know what he
Something
ended
like
up
that.
with, but yeah, it was ridiculous. And I think one piece of the, like, when I'm watching Mark Williams moving forward these last 20 games of the season, like, I'm trying to pick up on things that, you know, you see a little bit of a glimmer of hope where he can improve. And I think one place that I noticed against the Heat where he had a couple times where he was a player out of the short roll. And I think that is something that he is going to have the opportunity to do and get plenty of opportunity out of the short roll because one of the space that he creates on his screens. So he's able to dive quickly to the basket. But I think teams are also going to trap LaMelo and get the ball out of his hands. So he's going to be getting that ball pretty quickly, and it's going to put him into some uncomfortable positions where he's catching the ball above the free throw line. But I feel like he's been relatively solid in that area. He made a lefty hook shot against the Heat in the third quarter. He also, out of the short roll in the second quarter, got a little, you know, he was a little heavy on his shot, but he was able to miss a shot, go back over Kevin Love. It felt like he overmatched Love physically on several occasions in that game. But also too, like when I look about the short roll on that same possession where he gets the offensive rebound in the second quarter over Love, there was a cutting JT Thor on the baseline, which he missed. And so, like, these little things that I'm looking at, I'm just like, okay, if he's going to get the opportunity to put in positions where he's not used to, like a short roll, Lee, I don't know if you can speak to this in terms of that type of playmaking and stuff like that at Duke, but you know, there's going to be little things here and there with Mark Williams where there's going to be spots on the floor that he's put in that you're just not used to, and you hope that he can get a little bit better at these little things. And I think that's why I'm enjoying his time over the past handful of games. And the short roll is really what I'm looking forward to in the past 20 games. And I don't know, he'll probably never be like a Bam, you know, a playmaker out of the short roll, but you know, he could be passable. He could be passable.
Yeah, no, I think a few things on Mark. Like, number one, I mean, at Duke, there were, I would say, like, rare is not the right word, but like very, very few and far between kind of flashes of some touch passing that he did show. I think he still, you know, like you said, Richie, I think he still has a long way to go in terms of being a short roll playmaker. I think that is one of the kind of X factors for his development. I mean, the Ball Williams kind of pick and roll lob game is already starting to show itself from kind of a chemistry and fluidity standpoint. That is, I mean, talk about a awesome partner for LaMelo Ball in those type of situations. You know, one thing we've also talked about on this podcast is, you know, one of the many reasons why we were so hopeful that Plumlee would get moved at the deadline was because we wanted to see Mark Williams against starting centers. And I mean, last night was an incredible example of that, going up against Bam. Obviously Bam had his moments, of course. Bam's an all-star and one of the best bigs in the entire world. But you know, Mark Williams to be our starting center, to play a bunch of minutes against Bam, to be as effective as he was last night, I think is just, it continues to give that optimism. I mean, we had a listener question, I think like a month ago, you know, that was basically like, here's the three options. Mark Williams is a backup center. He's a starting center. He's an all-star center. And I took the, you know, to to call back to your earlier point, I took the very optimistic take of, I think he's got a chance to be an all-star in the future. And that's still an incredibly premature declaration. The odds are certainly against him that he would ever become that impactful of a player. But right now, you certainly see kind of the beginning flashes of that. James, one of our listeners on YouTube, also mentioned something I wanted to mention. I mean, he continues to be a really solid free throw shooter. He doesn't take as many as you'd like him to take, but he is shooting about, I think, 75% from the line right now. He was a good free throw shooter at Duke in his sophomore year. He's got nice touch. You mentioned the jump hook, some touch around the rim. And then, I mean, it's still a very small sample size, but the advanced defensive numbers with Mark Williams in the lineup are just ridiculous. I mean, the Hornets go from being one of the worst defenses in the league to one of the best defenses in the league when he's on the floor. Obviously, I'm not sitting here telling you that, like, with Mark Williams in the starting lineup for a full season, the Hornets would be one of the best defenses in the league. I don't think that's true, but his impact, his length, his timing, his instincts, his versatility are unique at the center position in the NBA. And then the very last thing I'll say is, to pour a little cold water, he still gets pretty abused sometimes in isolation. I mean, Jimmy Butler picked on him a few times last night. Jimmy's one of the best isolation players in the world. So that's, not necessarily to be unexpected. But there was another one last night. I don't remember if it was like Strus or Caleb Martin. It was one of their other more role player type wings, just kind of hit Mark with a little hesitation, blew right by him. So he's still got a long way to go, particularly like in space with his passing, the more nuances of the game. But I mean, as a shell of a developmental prospect right now, I don't think you could ask for much better results from the 14th pick in the draft. Is that right?
I think it's 15th.
15th. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree with all that. In terms of short role playmaking, like we saw small flashes at Duke, but he was a rim runner there. So that really wasn't a part of his film. And it's not a big part of his diet now. It never has been, right? So, but playing with LaMelo Ball, who, from not from the corner, above beyond the arc this year, from the top, he's 37%. He was 40% last year. Like, it's clear now we've got enough of the sample size. He's a really good shooter off the dribble. So defenses have to come to the level of the screen, and that's only going to give Mark Williams more and more and more opportunities to, operate either as a scorer or as a passer in that mid area. So that's going to be a part of his game. Just a product of LaMelo being a lethal shooter from the top of the arc, right? And I think he has the feel to do it. That's going to be the last part of his game, or one of the last parts that really comes together. Again, just because he hasn't had a lot of reps doing it. But I think it's obvious when you watch him play. Like, the game's not too fast for him. He has good feel. He does have passable touch as a passer. But Richie, like, you're missing JT Thor on the cut, right? Like, that's a synergy thing, number one, and just being comfortable with the speed of the game and the defensive rotations with the ball from the middle of the floor. And that's all, like, none of us should expect him to be doing that at 21 years old, right, as a rookie, at least very efficiently. But I'm thrilled with Mark Williams. I absolutely love this guy as a prospect. Lee brought up how ridiculous this team is right now defensively when he's on the floor. And they're good offensively too. I mean, he's just he dominates the game around the rim on both ends of the floor. Everything else, we'll see what comes together for his game, but he's an exceptional rebounder. He's one of two players in the NBA who has at least a 6% block percentage and a 2% steal percentage. Paul Reed's the only other guy in the NBA that's played at least 400 minutes this season to have those marks. So that right there, and Paul Reed's not a big part of Philly's rotation, right? So Mark Williams is kind of the only guy in the league that is making that kind of defensive, or being that disruptive on defense. So, I think that I think that this team is really got a solid foundation defensively moving forward under Steve Clifford. And Lee, I think it was you that made it. The point about getting cooked in isolation a little bit. Like I think that comes together more too as his footwork improves, but just the fact that like the steal percentage as a 7-footer, like where that is, like he's still able to be a disruptor and swallow up the ball in ISO defensive situations too. So I'm really excited. Like yeah, this kind of reminds me of LaMelo's rookie year a little bit, where we're like, oh, there's stuff here that's even better than we thought it would be. I'm starting to get that with Mark Williams, just in terms of how disruptive he is at the rim already at 21 years old is like rare stuff. So reason to be excited for Hornets fans, and we need that this year.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, I mean, 3.5% block rate, almost a 2% steal rate. I mean, I haven't run the filters on that, but I imagine that would be a pretty, like the names that would be in that group right now in the NBA, you'd go, oh man, like that's pretty awesome company. I mean, that's probably like Jaren Jackson Jr. And like, I mean, maybe, I don't know if Draymond's probably not still in that group, but probably was for a long time in his career.
Are you pulling those off of cleaning the glass?
I mean, no, I'm just like, that's just off the top of my head. But yes, the steal and block rate for Mark is off cleaning of the glass, but I don't have the filter pulled up to see who else would be in that group.
Well, yeah, and on Basketball Reference, his block rate 6%. So that tells you how much just taking garbage time out.
Yeah.
But it's still like, I mean, the point still remains. I mean, it's still super rare when you marry those two stats together.
Yeah.
How few players in the NBA disrupt in those two areas. So
I think that also speaks to his disruption, obviously, but his mobility too, in terms of just being in the right place. He's still a little bit lumbering, but I think one thing that separates him from Nick Richards is a little bit of that side-to-side action and mobility. I think that's probably why he's a better screen setter too. Like he can get to the point to where he needs to set the screen, and he's not setting those illegal screens like Nick Richards did at the beginning of the season. And we have a comment here from James, which I think is an interesting one. It says, has Plumlee's trade made LaMelo more aggressive? And it's something that I've been noting too. He seems to be playing differently since the trade deadline, and I'm not sure I can really put my finger on why. I mean, obviously Plumlee is out of the situation. I don't know if that's the sole reason why, because Plumlee he was a big part of the offense in terms of being a hub at the high post. So it's a little bit more, pick and roll, getting downhill a little bit quicker, not so much of holding up the play with Plumlee in place. He just seems to be zipping the ball around with more like no look passes, more flair. He's been also hitting some timely shots. Like when the opposing team starts to make a run, he's been fairly clutch. So I don't know what it is with LaMelo in terms of him, being more aggressive, or if it's just being simplified and the focus has been on him. And I've said earlier that like a lot of the offense is being run through him and Gordon, which to me is a better way to run the offense than through Plumlee. But we can't knock Plumlee for the things that he did provide for the Hornets, but it may have been holding LaMelo back a little bit in terms of the offense that you would like to run. And just like the drive and kick game too. Like I feel like LaMelo and Hayward are good at that. And sometimes when you have a body in there that's eating up some of the space and not creating any type of spacing out there, it kind of closes some of those gaps. So Lee, LaMelo, more aggressive because of Plumlee, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think LaMelo, is kind of fully in rhythm now as well. Obviously, I mean, we're pretty far removed from him, being injured and all that stuff. But I think he's just kind of fully engaged, fully in game shape now. I also think, I think the half court spacing is probably better. I mean, look, Plumlee had literally the best season of his career. It's also still true that, with Plumlee at center, the Hornets were hemorrhaging points to their opponents. Now, the counterpoint to that is almost every lineup for the Hornets hemorrhaged points to their opponents. So, but I do think that this with, you either have Williams on the court as a as a vertical spacer around the rim. He's not a traditional spacer, but him and Nick Richards both offer vertical spacing, pick and roll, lob threats, rim running lob threats, offensive rebounding lob threats. And then you marry that with the fact that it's either Richards or Williams on the floor, or it's PJ at the 5, who was out last night, but Steve Clifford all of a sudden decided it might be a good idea to play the PJ at the 5 lineup, which has been the Hornets' most successful lineup for the past 3 years. Don't necessarily want to see too much of that until next year again, but he's probably going to go to it a little bit more now that his security blanket and Mason is gone. I think LaMelo's been great. I think that was the other thing we were going to hit just super quickly is, number one, I think there's a corner of Hornets Twitter that is upset that this team has won 4 games in a row. And I tweeted last night and was just like, let's just all calm down here. It's okay if this Hornets team wins a few games, particularly if the reason why the Hornets are winning a few games is because of LaMelo Ball and Mark Williams. And that right now, obviously there are other reasons, Hayward's been good, all that stuff, but primarily it's been driven by LaMelo Ball and Mark Williams, who are the 2 young cornerstones right now. And the Hornets are so far behind Orlando and Indiana, and those are decent teams. The Hornets aren't getting to 5th from the bottom. It's just not going to happen. Right. And there's only a very small percentage difference between the top 3 and 4 at number 1. And if you really want to raise a massive stink about 1.5%, I kind of get where you're coming from, but I'm just not going to lose any sleep over this young Hornets team winning a few games if it's at the hand of our 21-year-old offensive engine being awesome. You want to see that. And the Hornets are still going to have one of the very best chances they've had in a long, long time to get a truly meaningful franchise-changing draft pick. So, as I tweeted last night, LaMelo's been awesome. Wake me up on draft lottery night because I just can't be bothered.
Yeah, exactly. I think your point is right, Lee. 1.5%. If you want to make us think about it, that's fine. I understand. I think smart people can disagree on this point. I think it's good for the Hornets to have Mark Williams out there doing what he's doing, to have LaMelo playing freely, and I would say rather efficiently. He certainly has his nights where it becomes a chuck fest versus effectively running the offense and being efficient with his shot selection. But look, they need to see success. They need to win some games. They need to build some momentum as we work towards next season because, the roster is going to look very, very similar, right? All indications suggest PJ Washington's coming back. Gordon Hayward will be back. Mark Williams will be the starter. LaMelo Ball will be here. We'll talk about another player, I think, shortly that might be a part of that. And you're going to add a really nice piece. If it's the 4th pick, this is still going to be a really, really good player. This draft is loaded. Brandon Miller is a great example. He might end up being the 3rd pick in the draft, but if that's the guy you get it for, off-court things aside, that he's a future all-star in my mind, and that's probably going to be the 4th or 5th player drafted. So, yeah, it's a percentage point and a half, and the Hornets can still get the 1st pick. So I think that I would prioritize building some momentum, winning some games as we get to the end of the season over trying to out-tank Detroit, San Antonio, and Houston, which I just don't think Charlotte's going to be able to do. And Lee's point is really the important one. No one from behind them is catching them. It's just almost mathematically impossible at this point. So, and all those teams are still jockeying for the play-in. All right. Yeah, that's all I have on that. LaMelo's been awesome. You guys made all the points on him.
Yeah. So the only thing else I was going to mention before we move on, Richie, was the Dennis Smith Jr. turned in another highlight. I think he was I think it was 6th on the top 10 this morning, which the top 10 this morning was I watched SportsCenter for the first time in ages this morning because the top 10 was awesome. the college basketball was absolute madness. Yes. Like, it's like everyone can just feel that we're 5 days away from March, and the chaos just is getting turned up like prematurely, which I love. Sorry for the Virginia outing though, Spencer. I know that was probably painful in some ways, but I mean, Arizona State hit a literal half court shot at the buzzer to beat Arizona on their home floor, and Dennis Smith Jr. turned in just a nasty dunk over Max Strus, which the most important point of that is it got an incredible soundbite from Eric Collins, which they did play on SportsCenter, by the way. So
can I just say real quick, I really hope that Charlotte brings back Dennis Smith Jr. next season.
Same,
I just think he's perfect type of player off the bench. You know, we know the shooting limitations, but he hits a big one, you know, off the catch last night. Like, I just love the energy level, defense. He's just a guy you trust at the end of games, in tough, you know, in tight situations. So I've just been really, really happy with him this year, and it's a cool story. Yeah, Lee, I'm driving straight to therapy after we get done recording. If I have to watch this Virginia team for 40 minutes, one more game, I'm just gonna keep pulling out clumps of hair.
You were so high on them to begin the season, Spencer.
Well, the idea of them was good. I mean, you know, and Reese Beekman was looking to make a step, and now I just don't think he's healthy. I think he's dealing with hamstring issues. It's kind of obvious. He doesn't have a burst. And Brian and I, maybe Brian can be my therapist, actually. We stand on the opposite sides of the fence, I think, with this Bennett Vanderplas debate. Like, I hate watching that guy play basketball, but Brian's like, no, you got to stick with it. The idea of him is a stretch five, which is just an idea because he doesn't make shots. Anyways, don't get me started on this, but yeah, it's a frustrating watch right now.
All right, sounds like Kaminsky. The idea of him was good.
Exactly. He can stand there and actually shoot it, but can he stand there and force defenders to run at him because he's going to make the shot? No, those are two different things. So it's an idea versus an actual thing that happens. Anyways.
I remember having those exact conversations when he was on the team. So, all right, there's been somewhat of an update, I guess, if you want to call it that, on Miles Bridges from an AP writer who spoke with Miles at halftime at a Michigan State basketball game. Miles is quoted as saying, "It's been a long process. I might be back in March." So I'm not really sure what to make of this because it kind of felt like a half-hearted update. Like, I don't think there's anything to add other than what was said between Miles and that AP writer. I do have a couple questions for you guys, but first off, there's no chance he's actually back in March, right? Like, I think unless he means like he's signing in March, because he still has to serve a suspension that will likely take him into next season. So I guess my point is like, if the Hornets are trying to bring Miles back and that's the end goal, why haven't they signed him knowing that a suspension is coming?
Well, I'm not entirely clear, like, you know, now that the legal stuff is over, I'm not entirely clear if the Hornets can sign him before the NBA does their investigation.
Okay.
Right? Because now they have to conduct, which I don't know if that started. I don't know if it's coming. You know, they're in the due diligence phase. Like what? I mean, I don't know what they've had a long time to do all the due diligence, and now they have the legal decision. And so can we get a suspension? Like, I don't understand really what's holding that process up unless it just started from the NBA's perspective. But I would imagine the Hornets can't sign him until the NBA is done with their investigation. That's just me guessing, but that would be why I think we probably don't have a new contract. But in terms of Miles saying that he could be on the court in March, I think that is some very wishful thinking.
Yeah, Miles may have had a couple Moscow Mules or two at the Michigan State game. You know, look, like, I have a couple quick things to say on this. Number one is I don't think we can really. I mean, what reason has Miles given us to trust like anything he would say about his return? I mean, obviously, he is certainly not in the good graces of Hornets fans or probably the front office, the coach. I mean, Miles has a long way to go to kind of prove himself as a reliable member of this organization if he's back at all. I think the only other thing I will say, and certainly understand some people may not want to hear this, and it is absolutely not symmetrical necessarily with any of my personal opinions, but the fact remains that when individuals are at a top like 3% in the world at what they do, they generally end up back in that profession regardless of what they've done. And I'm not saying I like that. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but look no further than where Deshaun Watson is right now. I mean, he got $100 million of guaranteed money after going through a pretty disgusting investigation himself. So I think all I'm saying is that Hornets fans need to start to come to terms with the possible reality that Miles Bridges will be back with this team after the suspension. And if that means that you are not a Hornets fan anymore, I respect that decision completely. Like, individuals have to make that decision for themselves. But just prepare yourself for the fact that he's probably back in a Hornets jersey next season under a new contract. And then you take that information and you decide if you want to continue to support this team or not. And that's totally up to the individual. The only other thing I would say is I was thinking about this actually watching the Orlando Magic highlights on SportsCenter this morning, which is a team that is kind of on a similar trajectory as the Hornets were, a year or two ago. And it would be like if Franz Wagner did something horrific this upcoming summer and didn't play for the I mean, their second best player, a potential future fringe all-star. That's the type of damage that Miles Bridges did to this franchise with the decisions he made this summer. And it was just interesting as I was watching this team, Orlando's kind of this darling ascending team with a young core and an awesome offense. And I was just like, oh, yeah, that's basically what the kind of comparison is here. It'd be like if their second best player, an awesome young wing like Franz Wagner, just did something horrific this summer and didn't play for the Magic next year. They'd probably win, 24 games as well.
Yeah, well said, Lee. I think that a few things, like in terms of the actual situation, like ethically where I stand, I think Lee's point about like people that are that talented at something are going to find themselves having another opportunity regardless of what they've done. Number one, I think what Miles did is like unimaginable, especially in front of your kids.
Yes.
But it doesn't even matter if the kids are there or not. I mean, it's unimaginable either way. But so I hate that. It'll always be in my mind, probably first and foremost with Miles Bridges. But most importantly is I hope that guy gets the help he needs. That's the most important thing. Whether or not he suits up for the Hornets, I hope that, and he's mandated by the court to go through a lot of stuff now to hopefully get what he needs. But I hope he takes this seriously. He is going to get a second chance somewhere. And I don't even know how I feel about that, but he's going to, and that's kind of, I think, Lee's point. So I'm not, if we're sitting here 4 years from now and the Hornets are, moving into the second round of the playoffs and Miles Bridges is a serious part of that nucleus, that success, I'm not going to protest, but I'm also always going to have in the back of my mind that, man, I hope this guy got right. I hope he learned something from this. I hope he became a better person, So, and that stuff we might not ever really know, right? But I think we're allowed to talk about basketball on this podcast and this not be an issue that always dominates the conversation with Miles if he does return to the Hornets. And I'm trying to keep that in mind. Like, this is a basketball podcast. I don't ethically tell folks what they should believe or should and shouldn't do. But if he does return to the Hornets, I do want to try to get to a point where I talk about Miles Bridges as a basketball player first and foremost, and wish upon him that he's getting the help he needs.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest point, Spencer, in terms of if he does get that second chance, also getting the help that he needs. And you mentioned the kids. I think coming from a parent's perspective, I have a different view of this, and the fact that they had to witness this. Obviously, she's the victim, but it feels like they are just as much of a victim as Michelle Johnson. And what's interesting to me is like she came out, I can't remember when, but she never thought that jail time would be the route that he should take. And I know that she's probably been a little bit involved in the process in terms of the consequences that come his way. So that's the only thing I can say that I could get a little bit more relief is that victim, Michelle Johnson, is the one that is speaking out and potentially, campaigning for him to get a second chance. But I'm still very torn. I've been against the signing of Miles Bridges for a variety of reasons. And I think one thing too, not that this is the only reason why you should or should not make a signing like this, but it feels like the city of Charlotte and the Hornets have had their fair share of PR issues recently, and they have to know what they're getting into when they sign up for, a player like this, and the scrutiny that they're going to receive, the attention that's going to come on this team. I think people are going to call the Hornets desperate because they are making a move for the basketball court because of the lack of success there. You remove him from the team, like Lee is saying, he's the second best player, and it's gone downhill. Obviously, there's been injuries and other stuff like that, but I don't know. Maybe if this was a bigger market like New York or Chicago or something like that, maybe the story would run a little bit longer. So maybe that aspect runs kind of in the favor of the Charlotte Hornets PR. But when it's all said and done, do you guys think his second chance will be here in Charlotte, even though they're going to take on that like PR headache?
I think it is. I think all indication is that they're going to re-sign him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows? But I think from reading the tea leaves, a little information that we have publicly, it does seem like they are interested in finding a way. That's different. Do I think like he deserves a second chance? I don't really know exactly how I feel about that yet. But yeah, look, the Hornets are going to be in an advantageous situation in re-signing him. Obviously he's going to be much more affordable than he would have been without this situation. And again, just speaking solely, I want to keep qualifying this, just talking about basketball, like smart business decisions, not the PR part of it. Like I would still rather hang on, find a way to bring back what is very clearly still an asset versus losing him for nothing. And that's probably, when you remove all the other stuff, that's probably how Charlotte is looking at this. Like, we're going to get him cheaper than we were going to, and he's still an asset moving forward, whether that's helping us win games or moving him later, right? Trading him later. So, but yeah, I do think he's probably coming back.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to quantify or even put any sort of, like, for lack of a better word, price tag on what his quote unquote punishment should be. Like, not a conversation I am qualified or willing to get into, but he's missed an entire NBA season. He's rightfully taking massive hits to kind of his, social reputation. And he's probably lost, I mean, at least for the short term, he's lost hundreds of millions of dollars because he was set to sign probably close to a max extension this summer before he made the awful decisions he did. So Bridges has certainly been hurt by this and should have been hurt by this. So I don't know, Richie. I mean, I guess if I had to lean, I would kind of lean towards Spencer's rationale on why it's more likely that he will get that second chance here in Charlotte. But then again, I guess there's always the chance that like new information comes out, or frankly, a guy who, again, we can't really trust his decision making right now. I mean, he could make another horrible decision at some point, God forbid, between now and the next time he's allowed to be on an NBA floor. So I think it's still very much a volatile situation. But if I had to put odds on it, just given kind of the history of these type of situations, with the production that Bridges has performed, then I guess I would probably lean towards he's back in a Hornets uniform. I just don't know when or what the kind of stipulations to whatever that contract might look like.
Yeah, can I real quickly, I think too an important part of this conversation is, Hornets drafted this player. They did all the background on him. Because I did this exercise the other day, if you go back and read a lot of the Miles Bridges draft coverage, I mean, character-wise, this seemed to be a high-character person. And I think that's kind of what the Hornets felt like they were getting. There's nothing serious in his background that suggests this is a person that's struggling with something or has issues off the court. So I would think that the Hornets are doubling down on that too. Like, this is a player we drafted. We're proud of his development on the court, and we like the person he was when we drafted him, and like the person he was until this awful situation came about. So they're probably not looking at it as like, well, shame on us. We knew this going in, and this has happened. I think it's quite the opposite of how they're looking at it. So I would add that to the conversation. And then, the PR piece of it, Richie, like, they're so closed shop when it comes to PR that I just don't really think they care that much. I mean, seriously, like I just, in a small market, Jordan, I think he's just like, he's probably not thinking that there's going to be protest outside of the Spectrum Center. And then Charlotte's going to lead Sports Center every day in First Take because they brought back Miles Bridges. Like, he's probably like, it's not going to be that. And I'm interested in winning basketball games. So I would think that they care up to a certain extent. And that's to say that they don't care as much as some other places would.
Yeah. It just seems like there's been a lot of like PR stuff, not even just like the Hornets, but just Charlotte in general. Maybe that's just because we're so into it, I guess, living here. But yeah, it's definitely something that they have to consider. We're going to wrap here on a listener question or two, but we kind of talked about this, or at least Lee talked about this. And so two of our followers, Cam and Matt S., I'm going to kind of lump their questions and comments together because they have the same sentiment. Cam asked if we should be worried about this win streak, and Matt suggests that the younger players like McGowan's and Kai Jones and even Bouknight, I don't know about that, should be getting some time. Does anyone in this organization even care about having a chance to draft Wemby? So Lee definitely put it into perspective on Twitter the other night. He put it into perspective here on the podcast. Yes, there is a difference between the bottom three and then the bottom four. Just for those of you that don't know, the bottom three records get a 52% chance of landing a top four pick and a 14% chance of landing the top overall pick. Being in the bottom four is a little bit worse of a position, but I think, to Lee's point, just enjoy the ride of these final 20 games with the mixture of veterans, with the mixture of the younger players that, are going to be a part of the future. At least most of them are. I think one thing I would like to see McGowan's get some play time, but with Kelly Oubre back in the picture, Terry Rozier is healthy again. I'm not sure how much more he's going to be able to see unless there's some injuries that come about. So I've actually enjoyed the past several games with them winning, and it feels like the players are enjoying themselves as well. And maybe that type of stuff makes a difference, kind of carrying momentum into the offseason. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure. But when it's all said and done, it would be nice to see if the Hornets could catch the Pistons. I think that's the only team that I feel like they could catch. I think Houston is kind of out of the equation at number one. And who's the other one? Spurs are going to be hard to catch. But to Lee's point, there's 20 games left, and I think there are 5 games that separate the Hornets from the team right below them in the standing. So mathematically, it's going to be very hard for them to be out of the top 4. So I don't really know how to answer this
It's
question.
even more than that, Richie. It's like 7.
7. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, yeah, that makes it even more mathematically improbable there. So, yeah, I would love to see the young players play, but to Lee's point, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Extra wins might push you out of the top 3, but top four is top four. So any other thoughts, guys, as we wrap up here on this episode?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, and Gordon Hayward's going to miss more games, in the last 20, right? Like, so we're still going to have opportunities for Bryce McGowan's and some of these young players to get in there. I mean, they've got Thor under contract for 2 more years, Kai Jones under contract for 2 more years. Like players that I know Bryce is on a 2-way, so there's a little bit of a gray area there about his future. But I would think that Charlotte does invest in bringing him back on some level. But yeah, I think you really need to get Kai on the floor to end the year, and you really need to keep finding ways to get JT Thor on the floor. Last night, like 26 minutes, like 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 steal, 0 points. It was very just kind of go out there and run around for a little bit, kid. But I mean, he's going to be on the roster for a few more years. So I would say Kai Jones, JT Thor, definitely in terms of young players who I would be prioritizing in the last 20 games. Just got to get them more reps. Got to.
Yeah, JT Thor is such a timid player to me, and I think that comes with the lack of experience, but he did get his first start against the Heat. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As always, give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast, and visit buzzbeat.substack.com for more information about our private podcast feed where you get ad-free episodes and early access. This episode that you're listening to was released on Sunday for our BuzzBeat Plus subscribers. So for Lee, for Spencer, I'm Richie.